learn all about who she is and her practice as an artist and her journey. Um,
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We're here in my studio, and it's a studio that's in my home, which has got the advantages of you're right there, you can go anytime, and then the disadvantages, you're still at home. So I've had to play up those two different ways of using the studio. I found that booking time in, so I get out of my house, I come to the studio, spend the day here, is really effective. It allows me to really focus. I thought I would give you a little view of my studio. I'm in the ground floor of our house, but we're built on a hill, so I do have windows, and I will show you if we turn around here. So I have a door that looks out over a marsh, and that view has been very influential in my work because I'm seeing it throughout the year and seeing the colors change, the light change. Throughout the day, the light changes. And so it's quite beautiful to watch the colors go, you know, from autumnal reds and golds to this dun, beige, ochre color in winter and gray skies. And then in summer, it's this full green, brilliant green. And then at times it floods, and that's been quite beautiful, seeing the reflected light. So all of these different views have played into my work. So in my studio, you can see here, I've got some pieces on the wall. The ones here, they're encaustic pieces. And they've just been up there because I like looking at them, referring to them. This is, you can see my paintbrushes and some paints. I generally tend to paint in containers. I like to make big containers full of colors. And so I find that I'll mix up maybe 7 colors, 8 colors, and then I find I can be quite free with the way I apply them. I use the paint in liquid form, in a thick form, and so having ready-made colors, I can mix them together, I can slosh around. I'm quite messy when I work, so which I'll review to you in a minute. So there's a paint station and elevated work surface. I like it to be tall so I can really work on it. And we'll keep going around, and then I will show you some other things. So there is 2 pieces which are in process on the wall. You can see I paint flat. I gesso the canvas onto the wall, and then I work on the wall and on the ground. I kind of go between the 2 of them. You can see the lower areas filled with paint. Those are the drips that have come down for the past 20 years of being in this studio. And these 2 pieces eventually be cut in half, and I will stretch them separately. I don't stretch until I've finished the painting. Because I paint flat and I use liquid paint, if I paint on already stretched canvas, it often pools in the middle. So I found it much easier to paint on flat canvas. So we'll continue our journey going around. You see some other pieces just waiting. Here are some, these are some watercolors I've done. I have a whole folio filled with watercolors of different sorts that I've used over the years, because I often work out things in watercolor and then I'll move on to painting. But the two mediums work very differently. But I can do, for instance, I was just recently doing these. These ones are all very fluid, and these were ones I was playing with the other day. I was suddenly becoming a little bit more geometric with my landscapes. I still consider these landscapes. And so I enjoy the freedom and the ease of playing around with watercolor. It's quick, it's easy, it dries. I can do multiples, they're small. And then I might bring some of those ideas into my studio practice. So these pieces are waiting, stacks of stuff. You can't see, actually flanking me on each side are 2 bookshelves, and they've got all my art books, which I think all artists enjoy collecting art books. They're always influential, especially if artists that you really enjoy. Diebenkorn, Bill Jensen, Mark Rothko, Matisse, et cetera, et cetera. Even, Spencer Finch, who's, quite abstract, Japanese prints. All of those artists, they've been very influential for me. And I really enjoy being able to pull a book down sometimes and just kind of flick through and sometimes you're inspired. Or, you know, on rainy days, reading a book in bed is a treat. Take one upstairs. So those are always kind of, it's nice to be flanked by those and to have those, you know, you're standing on their shoulders really, being a contemporary artist. So I like to kind of see whose shoulders I'm on. I find it helps with my practice. So I can show you, let me see. So over here is I have a stack of, so these pieces are waiting to be stretched. So here's, you know, one, this is a series of these kind of dreamy, I call them poetic landscapes. You know, the poured color, they're scratched, they're painted, and I have, you know, multiples of them. And here's another couple where this will show you I'm working on two at the same time, and I'll cut them and stretch them, or I may find that just one of them works and the other doesn't, in which case the other will be abandoned or repainted over. I generally paint over. You can paint over several times to a point where you can't do any more. And then if I'm going to stretch, this is one that's, I'm just starting to stretch. So it's got something on the back, something on the front. So this is the finished painting. And I just started getting it ready to stretch. So it's on this, and I'll just pull these round, do my nice hospital corners. And obviously, if you're a painter and you stretch, you know about the various tools of the trade. You've got this clamp thingy and your staple gun. And so this will be then, you know, stretched and wired and ready to hang. And sometimes when they're stretched, I'll look at them in a new way and think maybe they need working into with some fine lines or some thicker texture. So I'm always, you know, working on the pieces, and there's always a point at which you know it's finished and that's it, but I'm open to it. You know, if I feel like something needs an extra gesture, I'll do that. I'm not afraid to kind of go in and work on them. Does anyone have any questions about that? Or I also, if I can't be in the studio, I think like many artists, I'll make notes. You know, I have these little books and write down notes about things I've seen, you know, do little sketches. If I don't have a color with me, I'll just do, you know, black and white sketching. Sometimes I'll write in the colors that I'm interested in. Or I just do little sketches with colored pencil, you know, just to give an idea of things I want to work with. I also like to write about what I'm doing. I find in my practice that I'll get very involved, and you reach a new space with the involvement of your work. You kind of get in the zone, as people talk about, and the work just starts, you know, emanating from you, and you're no longer consciously thinking about it. You're just reacting and acting in it. And I think as artists, you'll all understand that space, and it's quite delicious to be there. It's a meditation of sorts, I feel. And when I know I have to come out of it, or when I've come out of it, I often will take notes just to kind of write where I was and what decisions I was thinking of, because my mind is going, you know, I'm like, okay, deep red here, and I want this color here, and I'm gonna do a gesture on this side. And I have all these kind of ideas, and I write them down so that if there's a gap between being in the studio and being away, when I next come to the studio, I can read my list and try and get myself back into that space. Otherwise, it's quite dismaying how quickly those ideas that were so concrete with you while you were in the space evaporate. And it's, you know, it's always a heartache to me that I can't remember where I was. So being able to take the notes and then refresh myself, at least that's a little kind of jolts you back into semblance of where you were when you left off. And I've always found that very important. I also take notes because I'm thinking about my work. I'm not analyzing as much as, you know, I'm often I want to write, what am I trying to do? I might start the new year off, you know, what is this year going to be in my art practice? Where am I pulling my work? You know, what direction do I want to shift it? And for this year, the pieces became very kind of ephemeral and dreamy with these very poured outlines and just very soft. Other work, you can see the ones on the wall, they go to the edges. Everything meets the edge. There's often a sense of horizon as well. So you can see there's kind of a difference between the two. I think I mentioned these ones I'm calling my, poems almost. I am influenced by Japanese painting, and I've likened them, I don't know how you'd say it, but to haikus sometimes. I want to, with economy, try and produce a sense of landscape and pattern, and also something beautiful. Beauty is important to me. I want it to kind of attract the viewer and to bring the viewer in so they can understand it in a new way, or appreciate it, or find something about it. We see, and it comes in, and then we want to somehow paint how we feel about it, or an essence of it. So that's what I'm trying to do. And so I can give you, that's going to bring you right up to the current time. I come from a creative family. My mother was an artist, and we were raised in Cambridge, England, which is a beautiful university town. My father was at the university. He's a scientist. And she was an artist, and she took us on, we'd go for walks, on picnics. Everywhere we went, we took little watercolor sets. Very much like, let me see, my mini one, like this. I've been buying them ever since, because once you raised in the habit of it, these little tiny Winsor and Newton sets, and they're very portable, and you can just have your set of colors. And so we were raised going into the countryside. I lived in an idyllic village called Grantchester, which is now a PBS show, amazingly filmed in the village I grew up in. And it had rolling meadows and a river and willow trees and cows and blackberries growing in the autumn and wild plums. I mean, it was really beautiful, and we were very aware of nature around us. And because I was raised by an artist, and we would go to the countryside and we'd look at it, and we'd always find a spot to sit and to draw. So I got very used to seeing the landscape continually and imagining, how would I translate that onto the page? How would I bring what I'm seeing, or which elements of this view do I want to include on my painting? And I've always had this kind of analytic way, in some way, of looking at the landscape. I'm aware of it, I see it, and I'll kind of fragment it or take it or crop it to imagine how I will bring that into my work. And so I painted en plein air a lot. I love en plein. I still do it everywhere I go on holiday. I paint en plein air. Often those paintings I consider a little more traditional than the work I do in my studio. My studio is more memories of how I felt, or what I saw, or colors that ignited something in me, as opposed to a direct kind of almost copying of nature, which I find my en plein air paintings are. But I still, it's still something that I do. I think it's it gets you looking in that way again, like taking classes, doing figure drawing. It's always, reiterating that looking and that mind-hand coordination, color choices, shadow, composition. So it's a lovely tool that I do really enjoy. So that's another thing. And I was encouraged to continue studying art. I had a great art teacher in my high school. I was very lucky, and he gave me extra lessons, and I was taught printmaking, and I think I was his only printmaking student, and he was really excited somebody was interested in that. So along with painting, I was doing printmaking, which is another medium I've continued to do on and off throughout my art practice. I do not have a press. I do basic printmaking at home, but I do go visit a press, and there's a place in Connecticut I go to where I print with a press, where I can do, monoprints or etchings or what have you. At home, I'm more likely to do a lino cut or a block cut, or something that's simple, and you can just use a brayer to make the impression. You don't need a press. And so from there, I then went to art college, or art pre-college. It's in England, it's a slightly different system. You have to do art foundation. And I did that at Anglia Ruskin University, which in my day was called Cambridge College of Arts and Technologies. And they've kind of changed the name a little bit in the past 30 years. And that gave me a foundation for art. And then I decided to have a gap year and come to New York. And I ended up staying in New York. So I did end up going to college rather in England. I went to college here. I went to Columbia and then graduated with a painting and literature degree from Columbia. And again, I did printmaking as part of that. And I studied lots of other things in between. I did a liberal arts course, and then from there I did a little bit of working, and I've just been painting, for the past 25 years. I've been painting consistently, and for the past 10 years probably, I've been really working into my practice. About 9 years ago, I became interested in curating, and I did my first curatorial project, which was very exciting. It was an abstract show, and I kind of got a group of artists together, and I really was excited by the whole every facet of the curating, pulling it together and, thinking about how do these pieces work together, and, the hanging, the virtual hanging, not the virtual, the literal hanging, or the positioning, the placing of the works within the gallery space was very exciting to me as well. Having things talk, having a dialogue between things. I even liked, dialogues across the gallery walls, and, just being involved in all of that. And I was lucky enough to be invited to curate at Pelham Art Center, which was wonderful. And I did a show there, gosh, was it last September or the September before? I can't remember. It was was 18?
Yes.
Gosh, years go past quickly. So it was 2 years ago, and that was, I think it opened in September, and it was a group show with 6 artists working in caustic, and it was very interesting to pull together these artists who had very different ways of using that medium, and it was very exciting to put them together, and I really enjoyed that. And it was great working with the Pelham Art Center. They have a beautiful gallery if you have a chance to go see. Really did enjoy that. So, and throughout that, I think from the curating, I kind of moved into doing some consulting, and I was lucky enough to have people who'd buy my paintings and they'd want some advice on framing or placing it in their home, and that kind of evolved into a small consulting business that I have, and then that led to some bigger clients and some corporate clients, and so that's something I've also been working on, which has been really satisfying. And so I've been able to do a little bit of teaching, I've done some consulting, and then I continue my painting practice. And I must say, as long as I get time in the studio, I'm happy to do all these different things. I will get frustrated if I can't get into the studio and give my own work the attention that I know it needs. I think all artists have that sense, you need to be doing your art. If you can carry your art with you, it's a lovely thing. I find it makes everything else possible. When I've given that good time to my art, then I don't mind other things, So, but it's also very important to have, art community, and to go to, to meet fellow artists, to be with fellow artists, to discuss art with people. That's a very important thing. And I've been, lucky enough, I have a nice group of people I see in the city. We go to Brooklyn to see galleries, go to the city to see galleries. Sometimes we a few of us will meet out here to see various different things. And that's been really interesting. I think it really helps you stay grounded, and it kind of keeps you, if not focused, it keeps you in mind of being in a creative realm. It's very easy as a householder, as a mother, as a wife, as a all of these things to kind of get swept up in other things. So I really need to have that, have the focus pulled back again to my art, to my painting, and to keep working on it. So I can keep talking. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
When do you want to do your slideshow, Katharine?
We could do it any time. I put together a kind of, it's almost a best of in the past 20 years, so it's a little extensive, but I put together a slideshow that just shows a whole kind of range of different things that I've done, starting with, you know, very early gestural figures, portraits, and then I moved into this series. It was myth-based, the Iliad, and then through that, I think it came out into landscapes. And anyway, it's, if you want to play it, we can just play, you can ask questions.
You can talk, you'll talk us through it, Katharine.
You want? Okay, we can do that. That sounds fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here we go.
Okay, so this was a figure drawing. I love looking at this piece. It was based on my children. My daughter was probably 1 or 2, and my son was 3 or 4. And just a gestural painting. These were done around similar time, maybe slightly older, maybe, but within the first few years.
What year are we in, Katharine? When was this?
Probably, let me see, 1991. No, sorry, what am I saying? 2001. This was part of the Iliad series. I was taking a class with a teacher, David Fox, who I really like, and it's the first class I'd taken since having a family and leaving college. So it was really fun to be with, you know, other artists. This again is the Iliad series. It was just playing with this idea of this abstracted helmet and this kind of Aegean Sea in the background. Kind of. These are actually, someone's saying what medium. These were all acrylic, and they vary in size. This page, the one with the helmets, that is probably, gosh, it's maybe 3 feet, so probably 30 by 45, and the other one is 8 by 10. So you can't really tell. The lower one, the more abstract one, was taking this idea and just trying to make it into a gestural shape. Playing with these different elements. I had these elements of a city, of a helmet, and of the ocean. Those were the 3 elements, and also war. The red was kind of representing the war of the Iliad, if you've read the book. Wonderful book. These were from, I had a very influential trip to India in the early 2000s, and these were just some pieces. I had an exhibition, and I don't think I have images of everything. So this was the Red Fort, and these were some little temple pieces. And then this was, we went up to the Punjab, and there's a beautiful river, and it was just, you know, influential. It just came out in my paintings. Again, these are acrylic on canvas. Another trip to India, very taken with the deep sky, the 2 on the right, you know, you can see night sky, semblance of town, abstracting. The ones on the left, they were all based on going to the Taj Mahal. Beautiful, beautiful building, I have to say. And I was surprised at how breathtaking it was. I just, you know, couldn't wait to paint it. So these are all in oil. This is oil. Another series of winter landscapes. They were done in acrylic. They're large, so this one's probably 36 by 48, which for me is large. I will say that the size of my painting has always been determined by the size of my painting area. So I can't go too much larger than the flat thing. So this is actually acrylic. Again, same series. Okay.
Where were you living when you started the winter landscapes, Katharine?
They're all here. They're all from here. So that they might very well have been, I mean, in fact, I know they're influenced by the view. So these ones are oil. These 2 you just showed a little later, they're oil. And again, I use the oil, I thin it down a lot with medium and with some turpentine, and to make it loose, liquid. I really like the playing with the oil thin, and I like it in contrast with some thicker areas. And I also like my canvas rough. So when I gesso, I buy raw canvas and I gesso it myself. And usually when you gesso, if people do it, if they're used to that, you'll do a layer of gesso and then you sand it and then do another layer and sand it and you build up this beautiful smooth surface on which to paint. I like a more tactile surface. So rather than gesso, rather than sand, I'll do the 3 layers of gesso with no sanding. So there's a roughness to my canvas, and I just like the way it catches the paint. I find it works for me in a way that I really enjoy. I like it bleeds in a different way and it works slightly differently. And if I want that slick surface, I can build up layers of just the paint on top of it using thicker paint, and then it will act in a more traditional way. So these are playing with the toothy canvas, as I call it. And again, you'll see these ones are all marked by this very, this horizontal horizon that cuts across the canvas, and they're painted from edge to edge. And I would just paint them flat, and I'd stretch afterwards, and they'd be wrapped. So the whole canvas, so the painting would literally go around the edges of the canvas. And you see mixtures of dripping and thicker paint and thinner paint and underpaint. And this is an encaustic. This is actually based on a view from Maine and from memory in Maine. It's, love sitting by the rocks, looking. We have a house on an island that we visit every summer, and just looking out at this. Actually, it's a river, and the mainland on one side, and it's got that kind of spiky. If you've been to Maine, it has a spiky trees, and the rocks in the foreground.
When did you start using encaustic as a medium?
Yeah, maybe, let me see. I think 10 years ago. I took some classes with David Fox at RNF Studios many, many years ago. And I was doing a series of paintings. I needed something to fill in. And I was talking to this, he's a colleague, he's a friend, he's a teacher as well. And we were talking, he said, oh, well, encaustic might be really interesting. And so I learned about it at RNF, and I just fell in love with it. If you don't know about encaustic, it's an ancient medium where you use beeswax and pigment and daymar resin. And you make this mixture, and you make it liquid through heat. So you have a hot plate, and you apply it while it's molten or while it's melted. And then you fuse it with a heat gun. And so it's got this kind of, it's very tactile, and it's quite delicious. And I just fell in love with it. I just thought it was, marvelous. It's very different to painting, and you can become very abstract and do some amazing things in it. But I do use it very much like paint. Some people build up tons of texture. Other people, they put things into it. This is one I did a while ago, but relatively recent. This is a much more abstract piece, and this has got tissue in it and all kinds of build-ups of things. So here's one where I've built these structures. These are 2.5 feet by, well, maybe they're 3 feet by 4 or 5 feet. They're large. And so they've got the encaustic in the sections with this string running through it. And jute's thread is what has created these spiral patterns or nautilus patterns. And they were part of a series I exhibited called Spiral Variations. And for that show, I did, prints, encaustic pieces, various works on paper. I did a whole range of things. It was a really beautiful exhibition showing, a variety of different mediums that I use, and it was exhibited in the gallery in Larchmont. Again, this is from the same series. I was playing with this idea of the different cells of the spiral. This again, it's got this, this one actually has got sewed gold thread running through the little sections. That was based on the myth of the Minotaur. So they were quite personal. It was, each section being a part of life. And I have a whole thing about it. This I did for an exhibition called Winter White, which I actually curated and I participated in. And it's just a just gorgeous, lovely landscape based on going up to Massachusetts, which is somewhere we go to the Berkshires a lot. And it's just kind of memories of views that I've seen. And it was done as a diptych. However, I did do it so that each piece could be taken singly if needed. Someone bought it and, you know, as the diptych, which I think is the best way to have it. I think it works nicely together. So, and that, you know, I use graphite in there to kind of delineate some of these lines. And again, this one, this is huge. This is maybe 3 feet by 6 feet. And again, this is winter, just abstracting of forests that I've seen. So back to painting. This is, I went through a stage. You can see my daughter is my daughter. She's grown up. She's no longer a baby in the leaves. I did a whole series of the teenagers who were coming through the house. The house was suddenly full of teenagers. And so because I kept seeing it, I thought, gosh, well, let me just bring them into my studio. So I actually did a series of photographs of them, and I was working from photographs. And I generally tried to photograph them when they weren't looking. So I'd be sneaking around, taking pictures, because I wanted to capture them completely at ease and not knowing that they were being seen. And sometimes they would just be looking up as I clicked, you know, like this. I'm kind of going, sneaking up. It got to the point where that's, Mom, get away. But I love some of the work I did. I really, you know, it was lovely going back to the figure, which becomes like a landscape in a way. From doing the landscapes. So again, these were friends who came. These are all oil. And yeah, these were more encaustics. So there's a whole series called the Cherry Vector series, and I was doing, this went across everything. I was doing small paintings, watercolors, encaustic works, and prints based on this. And it was based on a kind of wood grain idea. And this is 2 different ways of doing encaustic. One has a print underneath it that I cut into lino, and I printed onto the board, onto the panel before I did the encaustic. And the other one is just me having drawn this idea onto it. So it was...
Sorry.
Okay, it's the same, you know, same series. That was just, you know, okay, this was the same series. So we have one is this tiny etching 2 by 2, which is a photographic etching of the log. And the other one is a screen print I created from the same series of photographs. And the small one at the bottom is a lino cut that I created. So it just gives you, I was just kind of doing it across mediums. And as you can see, I love the color red. It often features in my work. I find it very kind of exciting. It's fiery. It's, you know, it's passion. Which is ironic, these are dead logs. So I did those small ones in both black and white and in the reds. So these are some oil paintings on paper. I did a series of these going back. These are actually older than the red series, interesting. Again, I loved working on the paper. It's very absorbent. But I don't know how safe the oil on paper is. You know, it probably lasts my lifetime, but I'm not sure. Again, it was the absorbency. You can work swiftly. I'm very gestural. And these were just, you know, trying to have this sense of space to bring the eye in. These are, so one of them is a chalk pastel. It's another medium I work in. Again, it's swift. And the other one's an oil painting. And the oil painting, so the chalk pastel is, you know, like 12 by 9, I think. And the oil painting is, I think, 3 or 4 feet by 5 or 6 feet. But similar composition. This kind of gestural landscape. And again, similar series. These are more Berkshire based. The encaustic one was done at the same time as those. So this is getting back to, oil paintings, small landscapes, 8x10s. So they're very small. It's interesting when you see things projected, the scale really changes. You can't quite tell how big anything is after a while. It's like Instagram. You can never really tell how big things are. From the same series. I think this one becomes a little more, these are all very much based on the view of the marsh from my studio. As it becomes like this in the summer, it's this kind of rich, and at different times of day. These could be trees, they could be mountains. There's some kind of gestural form of something in the distance. And again, using the paint liquid, layering up thick and thin. This one, this is small. The other one was larger. This one is tiny. This one is 8x10. I like this one very much. A larger one, oil painting, just an ocean view. This had been started many, many years ago, and someone came to my studio and they encouraged me to finish it. I abandoned it, and they said, "Oh no, I finished it," and it ended up being exhibited, and it was interesting that it started maybe 15 years ago and finished 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Yeah, more waterscapes. Again, the poured, the liquid, the fluid, but still with this horizon line. I try and break it up. This one I've tried to break it up, by bringing this diagonal. But I just fall in love with these lovely, beautiful light colors and just playing with them and how they react with each other. From soft pinks up in the sky and aquamarines and the navy blue. So I will have mixed up big pots of these different colors, and I'll just enjoy, playing and tilting to get some drip, and at a certain point you stop, and then cleaning up certain drips or spots that don't work. So I'm always working into it, so it's fluid but controlled. And then there's also something, when it dries, sometimes things will change. Someone's asking a question. I can't read it though. These are prints. These are a mixture of lino cuts and transfers and styrofoam cuts, and I did a whole series based on one holiday I had in Maine, and I was just so taken by the delicious nature and the leaves and the trees, and the one on the right, it's kind of, is it leaf, is it tree? It doesn't really matter. It's got that foresty feeling. And these ones, again, I took everything to the edge, they're bleeding to the edge. I think I'd just seen a show in the city of, the guy who does the combines. Why have I forgotten his name? Anyway, I was influenced by, what's his name?
Rauschenberg?
Yes, I just seen Rauschenberg's at MoMA, and I just suddenly wanted to build up these layers and do some things that just filled the whole page. And so these are lovely papers. They're 24 by 30, and I was given a ream of them. So it was wonderful just to be, when you've got 100 pages, just to be able to go crazy. So I've got lots and lots of these prints. I have spent a wonderful summer doing these prints. And I've had them framed, and people own them now, which is nice too. So that was a different way. That was bringing it in. So now we've got these borders. So it's something I like to play with, to the edge or bringing it in and having a focus and having like a ragged line. It's something that goes on and off in my own painting, as well as we can see here in these printings. I think some of these even involve rolling leaves and printing the leaves. So this small encaustic, this one actually is up on the wall. It's 8 by 8 on a wooden panel. Abstracted landscape. Same series. These are larger paintings. Again, this was, this was a show I did a couple of years ago in the city. And again, you can see the edges are really coming into play here, the two in the middle. I was deliberately trying to make these edges part of the painting as opposed to having the work going around to the edges. More from the same show. This was at the Painting Center. It was called Early One Morning. The same show, and the two on the right are actually monoprints. They're watercolor monoprints, which was a really fun technique. I mean, you don't actually need a press. You need a squeegee and screens. And it's a really fun process of building up these different layers to make your compositions. And there they are again. Smaller works. And in these, this neutral background, the edging. Yeah, I continued that, and many of these I would repaint the edging to keep it clean because maybe drips had got in there or the composition had gone too far. I was really trying to control the composition by painting over with this kind of neutral color. So it was both cleaning up and delineating, and it makes an interesting, I don't know, it creates a frame in some ways. Are we looking through something, or are these things floating on top? So you have a slight ambiguity of space, which I really enjoy because there's an ambiguity of space within that inner space anyway. I tend to flatten things and make them into patterns. At the same time, I do want a sense of the landscape to be present. So I'm always playing with these different spatial depths and compositions. So this was last summer. These are kind of beachy scenes with elements that I've seen from the beach, and I bring them together and put them into a composition. These two are gouaches, which is a opaque watercolor or water-based paint, and they're on paper. I did a whole series of them this winter. Where had I gone? I'd gone somewhere and upstate, and these winter trees and the way the sun, and there was something about it, was just very compelling. And I just came back to my studio, and I just couldn't stop doing all of these winter. I was just taken by the grays and the slight rouging at the bottom, and the darker green olive grass in the front, or the ground, and the gray skies. So I did many of these. I really enjoyed them. And something you may notice is that often when I do landscapes, I've got my paper or my page or my canvas is in usual portrait dimension, as opposed to being in a landscape dimension. And I've always felt much more comfortable doing this longer landscape as opposed to horizontal landscape. And I noticed something the Japanese and Asian artists do. I was interested to hear, to see the talk that was at Pelham Art Center last week. Very interesting to see that. And I'm wondering also if it's because I'm always looking out of a window at my landscape, and my window is this portrait stance. And I'm wondering if that has kind of affected how I look. Because as soon as I turn to do a landscape dimensions, I find it very hard. I like this kind of the squashing of the landscape, so I can build up layers quickly, horizontal as opposed to long horizontal layers. So just something I've always done. And there's one which is actually in landscape dimension, having said that. And this one starts bringing this motif of the sun. I started doing a lot of the sun or moon. It's an ambiguity. It's, celestial body, if you will. And often with these radiating rays. And I really enjoyed the ambiguity. Is it night? Is it day? Is it dawn? Is it dusk? In midwinter, I will say that the sun rises directly outside of my house, and I can wake up every morning and see the sun rising. It's quite wonderful, and that has played into my work a lot too. Seeing this very contrast, these sunrises, and you wake up, have a look, and then go back to sleep or get up, whichever you do. So I've just been very aware of the sky and then how it relates to the land, because I'm always looking at it. So this is moving more into this abstract. And now I started using instead of having to paint the edges with a neutral ground, I'm actually using a transparent gesso on the canvas, which I'm loving. And because it allows that color of the kind of buff canvas to come through, and that becomes your base ground on which you work. And I love the way the colors work with that buff ground. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. So I'm gessoing my canvases, and I'm starting with this, instead of this crisp white palette, I'm starting with my toothy neutral palette. So it's been really enjoyable. And I can't believe I didn't come to transparent gesso sooner. It's just this year I discovered it, or I finally got it. And yeah, and so that one is actually up on the wall. You can see, woo, you can see unstretched. Again, landscape based. This is very much based on a you know, on the sky, as much as the kind of garden around it. And that's much more recent. So you'll see there's definite, you can see the pouring, you can see the celestial bodies a little bit more discreet in there. And then there's, you know, the foreground, the grasses or the reeds or these natural elements. And then this kind of ambiguous space, you know, referring to, you know, plants, trees, marsh. This one is, it's based on the sky, looking up at the stars, and I decided to really exaggerate them and make them huge, because why not? And I have it right here, so I can show you. So it's quite big. So, and this was using oil paint, and actually I did the silver in oil paint too, and it wasn't silver enough, so I went over it with an acrylic silver I had to really bring out the silver. That's actually in an online show at the moment, available on Artsy. So that's, and that's, I think I did 3 of them. I was very inspired. And this is just showing some of the watercolors that I do. So sometimes I use the watercolor paper wet and I paint into it. And, you know, so you can see where the red orb or sun, you know, that was a much kind of wetter surrounding, so it's bled in that kind of delicious way. And then, you know, there are layers, you wait for layers to dry, you build up your layers, you use different things, but very much allowing this kind of undulating, free-form edging around it, which I think plays into the composition. I think it leads the eye. Again, it's reminiscent to greater or lesser degree to some Asian art, which they just do pieces in the middle and they have areas of space. So it's something that I'm really thinking about, and it's been in my work recently. 2 more. Those are, you know, happy spring pieces. Yeah, and more.
Oops. That brings us to the end. I just learned so much, Katharine, about you and your process, especially with the pouring. I have to ask, I adore her work as well, but Helen Frankenthaler.
Love her.
About the pouring and the landscape and your relationship there.
Yeah. I know, I look at her and I just want to kind of bow down because she takes it, and the scale of her work is so incredible to begin with. I would love to launch off. I haven't been able to leave my landscape more traditional, you know, it's got a sky area, it's got a land area. I'm still very much in that, and I love that. So at this point, they're going to very much, I haven't like branched off into complete abstraction. You know, she goes into these incredible places. And I think we each take things from other artists and, you know, take elements of what other artists have done, because as I said, we're standing on their shoulders, and we kind of make it and change it into our work. So.
Mm-hmm. I thought, and I'm just kind of telling everyone my immediate thoughts. Very interesting about the portrait versus landscape mode, and that you're doing the landscapes. And I read that because looking at the body of work, you've had this love of landscape for so long, since your youth. And I really adore that story of the watercolor mini to-go pack and just being out there in nature. So to me, you saying that, it was like, well, obviously she's also talking about the portraits in that figurative element, but how we're all nature in a way, or I guess I'm reading into it kind of hard here.
Yeah.
And I see some of the bodies of work, it's very interesting, of going with myth, historical reference, and then just kind of this larger thing of life itself with the world or the landscape or the celestial sky element or those abstracted things. But there's kind of a universal element as well.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to show you, because over here, I can just, this is how I stack them. So I have these two, and I'll just take them down. And then this one you'll recognize. And then this is a much lighter one. And here we have, I don't need to say anything, I can just show them to you. So it's easy to store them when they're all stacked up. I mean, when they're hanging. This is, gosh, I forgot about this one. That's a very bold piece, more akin to that one. So this is what happens. Now I forgot I even had this one here. This is a piece that was a first lay down, and I liked it, and I just left it because part of me thinks maybe that's the piece. I'm not sure. So when that happens, I'll just leave it and live with it, and it will either become the piece or it's not finished and I'll work into it. I'll leave you in, here is a kind of whole piece of gesso which I've put on this wall, and it's because under here is my, as I mentioned, my 20 years of painting, and it's made this amazing wall, and I love the wall so much. I sometimes wonder if this is my 20-year piece. And I had a friend and a colleague here who was, she said, well, why don't you put the canvas up, and then all of this will start happening on the canvas, and I'll have it on the canvas. So that's what I've done by covering it up with the canvas. It also happened to look much neater for today, as opposed to just having this big scruffy, I mean, I love it, I have to say. I have the same here. I mean, everywhere, underneath every white cloth is, under my top, is my painty top. Can you see this? You can't see this. Let me do the other end, then you can see it. This is going to be, this is like lifting the curtain from the tiny studio. So over here, I'll just show you how I have, when I work, the floor is much more like this. Whoops. My radiator coming off. So if you can see, it's very painty. So when I'm in paint mode, I generally have my paint outfit on and my apron, and then I don't have to worry about anything. My floor is covered with these painty tarps, and I'll work there. But when I want people to come to my studio, I like to make it look more presentable.
A technical question: how do you put the unstretched canvas on the wall?
Staple gun. I go through hundreds of staples. I've got one huge staple gun and another, and I'm just constantly taking them on and off the wall. So if this was my piece, and I gesso, I will staple it. And so once it's stapled down, you have to staple it completely around if you're to gesso onto the canvas, because the gesso shrinks and tightens the canvas. And if I haven't got it completely stapled around, it will warp and it will do these strange things. So I'm actually you know, stapling it to the wall, gessoing it, and it dries in this gorgeous flat, let me see if I can show you one, like this. This was actually a piece of one. I'll gesso a whole big piece like this, and I chop it down into little bits. And the giveaway is seeing where the staples are. So all of my work starts off with many staples. That's not even that many. Some of them have hundreds of staples. So when I go to stretch it, the first thing I have to do is sit there, zen in the art of taking out the staples, because there are often so many. And I work on multiples, so I'm not kind of cleaning up as I go along, so I just leave the staples in them.
I'd like to open it up. We have a few more minutes. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, or you could also put it in the chat box. I know there are couples I missed in there, but Priya.
Hi, Katharine.
Hi, Priya.
Wonderful. I have a question regarding your series. You have so many wonderful, related but completely distinct series. At what point do you decide that the series is over and we're moving on to something else? Is it because you're bored, or because you feel like you finished a story in your mind, or because you're following guidelines?
Yeah, interesting question. I think sometimes it just happened. I've come to the end of that inquiry. You know, I was so interested in wanting to do that form or that theme every which way, and all of a sudden I feel like I've satisfied that, and I get involved in something else. And sometimes it's just a tapering off, and I'm already starting something else as I'm finishing off things from another series. And yeah, I mean, I get very involved in my work. I think we all do. We get kind of heavily involved in our work, and we can't wait to do the next one and finish up this one. And the series just emanates. I'm not starting off doing a series. They just come. And then at a certain point, my inquiry might just change. And so I think, gosh, now I want to chase this ephemeral thing. You know, I want to kind of understand it in this way. So I feel like my current work has very much evolved out of the work I did before, you know, the past couple of years. I've just taken it, I'm just kind of abstracting more, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm just doing it in a different way. And I'm still got the same, to me, the concern of these is A, the landscape, and B, having this kind of free-form border around it. So the landscape is very much the focus, and there's this kind of element of space between the edge of the canvas and the form. I'm seeing Barry Mason there, and I'm just thinking of you automatically in the shaping of your canvases. You've got these shapes you've already created, and then you're painting. So you have a similar inquiry in some ways, that there's this element of shaping the external edges, you know, the negative space almost is as important to the piece as the piece, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And also, I'm glad I got a chance to see your work, because I met you through Pelham Art Center, and you teaching in caustic. I took a class with you, which I really enjoyed. And so, you know, I'm so happy to see, you know, other works that you're doing, because I didn't realize you did, you know, work in so many different forms, whether it be printmaking, acrylic, watercolor, oils, and so forth. And so thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I also learned so much, especially about the printmaking, and that series with the logs. I thought that was so interesting, and the way you were using all those different techniques. I think you had 3 different printmaking processes.
Yes. I didn't do any paintings in that series. That was the only one I didn't paint. It was printmaking of different varieties, and then encaustics. I called it my cherry vector series, because the lines of the log are kind of like a vector. And I was using this cherry red, and I was obsessed for it. I think some people here might remember when I was doing the series, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And then it came to an end. And I'm not sure why, but I think I must have grasped onto something else that became more compelling. And I think I felt I'd done that in every way that satisfied me for that particular series. So it was fun to see it again, I have to say. It's always nice to look back and see things and think, gosh, I did that. And how maybe work now refers in some way to pieces that you had done. You know, I think there's this ebb and flow with your process. And I'll do things, I will say that sometimes I've done paintings which seem completely outlying to what I'm working on at the moment. Like that one I just showed you, which is on the ground here. It's different to the other ones, and yet there's something about it that compels me not to immediately paint over it or change it. And I've sometimes found that those outliers, several years later, I'll find them and be where I'm painting in several years. So it's as if they're kind of prefiguring something that might come later on. And I'm kind of interested that has happened many times in my practice. I've done 1 or 2 paintings different to everything else I was doing, and I'll put them aside. And eventually I might get to where those paintings were. It's as if they were a little hint of something, a future, a peeking out at the future.
Katharine, hi.
Hi, Adele. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And it was really exciting to see all of your work, especially the past ones, because I've never seen those works, and it's such a wonderful variety.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and in the same way, I realized that you use a lot of medium and you use them all well. So 2 questions: do you have any favorites? And second, how do you decide what medium to use when you start a painting?
Oh, good questions, both of them. I think I always think of myself as an oil painter, as a painter, and yet I would definitely. No, I'm not answering it correctly. Let me see. I do think I consider myself an oil painter. However, the other mediums, I think, are just an extension of that. When I do encaustics, it's all stacked up on the side here. When I do encaustics, I'll say, okay, I've done, these oil paintings are finished, they're drying. I now want to take this process into a different medium, and I'll set up the encaustics. It'll be a setup. And once it's all set up, then I'll work in that for maybe, a month or so, weeks, however long it takes. I'll commit to that, and and in between doing that, I might do watercolors as well, because I find they're so portable. I can do them anywhere. I can do them at the dining room table. I don't have to be in my studio to do those. And that's another thing I quite like about it. You can take them anywhere, do them. I can chat while watercoloring. I don't mind. Whereas in my studio, I need to be by myself and have no interruptions. So during this confinement or this quarantine, I was doing quite a lot of watercolors upstairs with the family, because all of a sudden everybody was home, and it was nice to be able to do something creative and be around everyone in the beginning. Now it's like old hats. I'm back down in my studio, thank goodness. But for the first few weeks, I think it was such a curious time. It was hard to get into my studio, and so I did loads of watercolors just so I could just keep doing a creative thing. And I mean, yeah, I have a binder full of loads. I mean, I always do them. It's something. I don't know if that's answered your question, Adele.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. I'll decide. I'll think, gosh, I haven't done encaustics for a while. Let me see where I am with that, and I'll get them out, and I'll start working on them. So.
Thank you, Katharine.
You're very welcome. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Well, this has been such a wonderful, wonderful studio tour. I want to thank everyone for being on this call. Again, we are going to continue our virtual programming. So you'll see more studio visits coming up soon, and all sorts of things we're trying out. Katharine, do you have anything? We're going to kind of wrap this up. Any kind of closing statement?
I would. I just thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to seeing, if you're artists, I look forward to seeing what you yourselves are doing. It's always an engaging conversation to see what artist peers are doing. And I want to thank the Pelham Art Center for your support. This was wonderful. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was really fun. It was a good excuse to spring clean the studio as well, I have to say. So thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, well, thank you, Katharine, for everything that you've done and for donating pieces to support our fundraisers over the years as well. I'm just learning so much about, from these, in general, these virtual studio tours. I'm learning so much. So thank you for sharing about your life and your artwork and your journey as an artist. It's really fascinating, and it's an inspiration. And I hope everyone out there continues to create and appreciate art no matter where you are, from your home. You know, maybe we're going to look out a window and think a little differently and be like, oh, the horizon line out my window, I'm going to think it's Katharine Dufault, or whatever it may be. It's all part of those informational nuggets that we take on and pass, and you know, inspires us. You know, it could be now, could be a year from now, 10 years from now, we don't know. But thank you so much, Katharine. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see some of you soon, all of you soon. And I can't wait to have us back to normal in the future. For now, keep creating. Enjoy, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye-bye.